I saw that. Yeah, I got a lot of emails. They were so funny because I had talked to the registrar, Courtney, and like said, okay, how should I handle this? And she said the only way to guarantee the people on your wait list get in is to do it one by one. And then I got an email yesterday for the registrar staff, and they were like, why do we have all these emails? Why didn't you just raise the cap? And I was like, I'm CCing Courtney. She and I had a conversation. Yeah. I mean, they have a lot to do, especially these 2 weeks. So I empathize a lot, but it's like, just talk to each other. Just talk to each other. Nope, that's not what I want to do. Yes, it was what I wanted to do. Okay, good. All right, we're gonna take just a sec while I mess with Zoom a little bit, and then we'll get started. Folks who are here in person, we didn't have as many trick-or-treaters as we thought we would last night, so please help yourself to some suckers because we have a lot left over. Not a lot of people came out in the rain, unfortunately, so. All right, new share. Make sure we got my whole screen. Okay. So we are gonna start off today by reviewing APA style because there's still a couple people who are getting tripped up by it. And I totally get it. It's new, it's different. If you've never done it before, it's very distinct from MLA, or I'm having to do Chicago style for a journal article right now, and I've never learned Chicago style. So it gives me even more like empathy towards y'all learning a new style because not that I didn't have it already, but just even more so because it is really difficult to wrap your head around a new type of style. So I'm taking just a sec to check everybody off, and then we'll go ahead and do some practice together here. All righty. Easier if I just do this. There we go. Alrighty, got everybody on Zoom. Let me double check that I got everybody in person here. Okie dokie. And then after we do some practice, we'll go back in and continue with our lecture. But this, I would say, on exam 2 was one of the most consistent places where people struggled, which is why I included on, more than one exam, because I know it's hard and it's different. So I had this same problem the first time I taught this class. So I had already pulled some articles to use as examples. These are in my wheelhouse of eating disorders, just because that's what I have articles laying around about. But obviously it's going to be similar no matter what kind of style you're looking at. I don't want any of this stuff here. Okay, well, maybe if I just, start typing. There we go. Alrighty, so if I wanted to do an in-text citation for this article right here, what would I start with? And again, people on Zoom, feel free to unmute or stick stuff in the chat. People in person, feel free to just yell it out. Yeah, the author names. And under APA version 7, what's kind of nice and saves you space is if there's any more than 2 authors, you just are going to do the et al. Which is, and I'm going to try to blow this up so y'all can see what I'm typing a little bit better. There we go. Which is just fancy Latin for and everybody else, basically. Now, one of the things, and this I tried not to take points off for because this has thrown me and my retired grad advisor when we're working on our meta-analysis, is that sometimes there will be different years listed on the front of the page. So like Jan and I have had to reconcile some of this stuff as we go back through, right? So like this one boggles my mind because this is a very long publication process. It was accepted on January 6th of 1999. So you would think it's a 1999 citation. But when you go down to the copyright down here, or you're looking at the year here, then it's actually 2000. So it took a full year for this to actually get to print, which again, boggles my mind, even as someone who knows how long the publication process can be. It's usually not that long. And now the beautiful thing is, as soon as you get your proofs done, they actually publish it online for you. And so then like, it's usually the same year unless you get it accepted in like December, right? All right, so for this one, it would be 2000, not 200, 2000. This person did not live right after Jesus. So that's it for an in-text citation. And that's beautiful and lovely. And you would use the same one anytime you cited this throughout your poster that you're making or throughout a paper you were writing for another class. And then let me see. Yeah, I should be able to zoom this in a smidge too, so y'all can see it a little bit better. So once you get to the reference list, this is where you have to be a little more involved. So the first thing you're gonna do is include all the authors' names with their initials. And so it's last name, comma, initials. Some people will just use their first name or first initial. Some people, like you'll see this W. Stewart person, will have 2. So I publish as Taryn A. Myers. So if someone was citing me, they'd be Myers, comma, T.A. Now, one of the things I realized that I unintentionally misled people with, did not mean to do this, is I was talking about if you have multiple citations in text for like the same sentence or paragraph, then you list those alphabetically by author. I think some folks thought that that meant you alphabetized the authors when you were doing the reference. And that's not the case. A, makes it way more difficult than it needs to be. And then B, believe it or not, author order is something that is very carefully negotiated as you go through things. So the first author is supposed to be the person who does the most work, typically the person who conceptualized and led the project, although there are some exceptions that I'll get to. And then you sort of go down based on who did the most work and who contributed the most. So for example, I'm working on a paper with a colleague who's now at University of Arkansas and a colleague at Kenyon College. And we were talking yesterday about author order for this paper. And I was like, look, I don't need to be first or second author on anything anytime soon. I have full, my colleague who just started at University of Arkansas, you're starting your career, it'll help you more to be higher. So why don't you be higher? And because she's an ethical person, she's like, okay, well, I don't feel like I've contributed that much. And I was like, I've contributed exactly the same amount you have. And so then my colleague at Kenyon was like, I'll give you a little extra to do. And then you can feel sort of good about it. And that's how it's supposed to go. It's supposed to be based on the amount that you've contributed to this work. There are exceptions. So sometimes what you will see, particularly if there's a really long list of authors, is that the last author will be the principal investigator. So they're the person who may have gotten the grant that funds this project or maybe organizing this project. And so you will often see that as well. In this case, I'm guessing Stice was the primary just because he is a huge name in the field. And so that might not be the case again for the sort of shorter author list, but you will see that. Taking 2 steps to the side, there are some people, no one I've associated with, but I've heard horrible stories where like grad advisors will put their name first when they go to publish their grad student's dissertation. You didn't do all that work, your student did, right? So there are unethical people in the field. There are also people who will like put everyone who works in the lab on every publication, even if they didn't work on that project. And that doesn't make sense either, right? And so ideally it should be who contributed the most, and therefore we keep it in that same order as we go through. So then this would be Mazzotti, oops, L, Weevil, C, and then you use the ampersand. I'm actually glad I'm typing this because I can never actually draw the ampersand. Sometimes I do this on the board and my ampersands always look really weird. And then this person would be Agris, and because they have 2 initials, it'd be WS. Then you put the year, and again here it's 2000, even though initially it might look like it is 1999. And then you retype the title. Now I do have to say, if you are thinking you might go to grad school in psychology or another field that uses APA or a consistent style, there are programs you can purchase that will do this for you. And so that might be worth an investment. I've still never invested in one. I probably should. But I was taught to do them by hand. I check them by hand. But it would save me a lot of time. So I should probably actually do that at some point. But they do cost some money for the subscription, but my understanding is they can be life-changing. All right, so dissonance prevention program decreases. Then ideal internalization, body dissatisfaction, dieting. Wow, they just put everything in their study in the title. Just, you know, people have different naming conventions, but this is me. I would say dissonance prevention program decreases factors related to disordered eating. Like, make it a little more concise, but that's just me. I'm also not one of the leading experts in the field, so maybe Stice is onto something. All right, and then okay, so a couple things here. Even if the title on the article you're looking at has every word capitalized, you only capitalize the first letter of the first word, unless it's a proper noun, right? If this was like in an American sample, you would still capitalize American, right? And then if there's a colon or a semicolon or a dash, then you capitalize the first letter of the first word after that. All right, next you have the name of the journal. Sometimes they will awkwardly abbreviate the name of the journal. I don't know why they do this. I've noticed that like medical journals in particular like to do this. If you stare at this and you're like, I have no idea what that is, you can just do a quick Google search and it should bring you to the citation for this. So let me just do that real quick. So if I just copy paste the title and I open a little Google search here. Then if you just sort of click on any of the links, then it should give you at least a, gosh, this one doesn't have it either. That's obnoxious. Kind of look around to find it. There we go. So just kind of click around until you find one that has the journal spelled out. I knew this was International Journal of Eating Disorders, but admittedly, probably when I was in undergrad, I wouldn't have known that. So then you spell out the whole journal title. And here, I am going to model for you all what I do when I don't remember something. So I actually do not remember, because they changed this from version 6 to version 7, how they do the journal volume and number now, because it's different than it used to be. So what I'm going to do, if I was at home, I have my APA style guide right next to me, I'd grab it. Since I'm not there, I'm just going to grab my PowerPoint and look up what it is. And there's no shame in doing that. And anytime I have a weird reference, because like in this day and age, you end up referencing, like, I have a statistics website I go to that has updated statistics. I pick up that book and I look up, how do I cite this weird thing? All right. And so then I am just going to take a look-see here. And again, try to zoom in for myself. There we go. So the volume number is italicized, but the issue number is not now. That used to be different. And it was different the version before that. I don't know why they keep changing it. Obviously, it's frustrating for those of us who teach it as well as do it. But we go with what they say, right? So we just sort of roll with that. All right, so if I go back to my sample article here, then what I can find here, and sometimes this will be up at the top, sometimes this will be down at the bottom of the page, and sometimes it'll be at the end of the abstract. And this one has a volume number, but not an issue number, and that's fine. So then I just do 27, I unitalicize, and then you put your page numbers. Actually, I think that's a comma. I'm going to double check. Yes, it's a comma, not a period. See, double checking, making sure, no shame in that. This does have an issue if I look at the place where it's listed. So I'll go ahead and just include that as an example. This was issue 2. And then you just list your page numbers, 206 to 217. And then what you need is your digital identification number, the DOI, digital object identifier. There we go. And it used to be, you would actually type DOI and then copy paste the DOI afterwards. Now you just copy this link and stick that in there. Boom. So there is a citation here. And again, I'll try to make everything fit here. There is the citation and then what it would look like in the reference list. So let's do a couple more, again, just for some practice. And I'm going to try and find, I think I pulled them from different journals so you could kind of see what these, what a different journal might look like. This is actually the same journal, just their updated format. So stuff is in different places. So I can give you a couple, again, just sort of an example here of how you find this stuff. Alrighty. So here, if I was going to cite this in text, it would be part, not part at all. And then again, I need to find the year. And right here, it says 2015. All right. Okay, and then again, all right, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to do heart. And this is a nice example because a few of these folks are using their middle initial, right? So you're going to do L, M, and then Cornell, C, and then S, R, the ampersand, Paxton, SJ, and she's a pretty big name in research as well. And again, we just decided this was 2015. Prevention is systematic review of interventions involving parents. I'll go back and spell check in a second. That aim to prevent body. Ooh, sorry. To prevent body dysfunction or eating disorders. Do a little spell check there. Sure did mean involving. Okay. And then again, this is the same journal. So International Journal of Eating Disorders. And this one I noticed, they must have realized this was hard for people. So down here, they actually have both the issue, the volume and issue number. So you don't have to go look it up somewhere. 2. And then pages here are 157 to 169. And then this is always obnoxious to me. It's like, just put your DOI on there. A lot of people aren't, unfortunately. So again, what you can do to find the DOI is just do a quick Google search and find one of these, probably this Wiley one, since that's the journal that owns it. Yep, we'll have the DOI link right there. So then you just copy paste it. I never type out the DOI because I'm gonna F it up, right? It's a lot of random numbers and letters. And so I do not retype the DOI. I always copy paste, and then if I need to, I reformat it. Alrighty. Trying to find a different looking journal. Yeah, here we go. Again, just to give us some practice, we'll do this one and then we'll be done. But here you could see the author names are here, really tiny. So again, you might have to sort of hunt around to see them. So this is, if we were doing the in text, it'd be Solano, Pinto, et al. And gotta find a year. 2021. Again, down here. So again, sometimes it can be hard. So you got to look up here. This one has it both at the top and at the bottom of the page. That's helpful. Thank you. So this would be 2021. And then Solano, Pinto, N. Yeah, Vera, Y, as Cesar, R, and Davidol, D. Nope. And then again, we just established it's 2021. Boom. And then and parental. And I'm not going to retype the whole thing because you guys get that now, right? Like that I would have to retype that whole thing. All right, here. The name of the journal is Frontiers in Psychology, even though they are trying to be cute and clever by not, this is like a branding thing a lot of companies do, by not like capitalizing everything. We still capitalize the name of the journal. Okay, and then in terms of the volume and issue number, I do not see an issue number anywhere. Again, we could search it, but for now, let's just act as if there wasn't one. That happens sometimes. And then page numbers can get tricky on these. So this is what's called an open access article. We've talked about open access before, right? Where people pay extra so that anyone can read this. Some open access journals don't put things together as if they were in a bound journal. So if you go to the library, there actually is a section of bound journals still. And that's what, like, That's why, like, the next journal article might start on page 15 because the first one was 15 pages long, right? And so a lot of these, you might just be looking at the actual page numbers. So then you just sort of scroll down to the bottom and say, okay, how many pages long is it? Looks like it is 12. So then it's just 1 through 12. And then this one, I noticed they did have the DOI on here, which was lovely. So if I scroll all the way back up to the top, then I should hopefully be able to copy paste it. It wants to open it for me. But I can get it from here if I need to. There we go. Boom. So that hopefully was helpful in realizing, you know, how you do some of this. Let me just do one quick poke around to see if I had any articles that were solo authored as examples. I didn't. Most articles within psychology will have at least 2 authors. 3 or 4 is probably the average. Some have very large research teams. So I am an author on some publications coming out that have research teams that have, I want to say there's like 80 plus of us on it. And we're all contributing, so we're all listed. The fun thing about APA, and I think I talked about this for our PowerPoint here, is that if there are up to 20 authors, when you do your reference, you list them all out. Once you get to 21 or more authors, then you would list the first 19. Then you use the points of ellipses, and then you list the last author. And again, that's because a lot of times that last author is that principal investigator. And so their contribution is considered important. And they want to acknowledge that person. Now, why did they take this up to 20 when it used to be 7? I have no idea. Someone somewhere who was like a low author on things was like, we should recognize more people. I don't think it's a great use of time or print space, to be perfectly honest, but I don't make APA style. So as you are, you know, looking at this, if you have any questions, please let me know. I'm glad to do more examples in class. I'm glad to meet with folks one-on-one if they have questions about things. I know that this part can be confusing. And again, this is sort of like the foundation where we teach you all how to do this. So I'm willing to spend as much time as we need to go over that. All right, so just to kind of remind ourselves, where are we? What are we talking about in our lectures? So we are talking about integrity and psychological thought. We're talking about all the ways our brains can trick us, right? And we had just talked about some of these issues with like not great samples or looking at just one case, and really how much we need to try to get samples that represent the population. And so this does not only apply to psychological research, you can apply this in a wide variety of situations. And so I found a video talking about the NFL draft related to this.
There's another finding in psychology, it's called the false consensus effect, which is people think everybody is just like us. And so the teams go through this. And they're all petrified that the player they're in love with, everybody else is also in love with, and they're all going to take him if they don't take him right away with this very high pick. And so it's decision making under uncertainty, and this year the uncertainty is greater than ever.
And so this can create false panics. This is why you will see people line up to get the latest video game. For full disclosure, late 90s, this is why people lined up to get the new Beanie Babies. I was unfortunately one of those people. I believe my parents just threw them out after they saw the news story about some of them like harboring spider eggs apparently. So they were like, we just, we got this bit of them, trash. They just didn't even want to look. But back then you believed you needed to get them because these were an investment. They were not an investment, unfortunately, or fortunately, depending. Now, obviously, our brain is not just trying to trick us. What the brain is trying to do is make us work through things more effectively and efficiently. And so it creates these cognitive shortcuts. And some of these are really helpful, right? So for example, I still remember the quadratic formula because when we learned it in 8th grade, we learned it to the tune of Pop Goes the Weasel. X equals negative b plus or minus the square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. I don't really need that knowledge in my day-to-day life, but it's in there, right? And if I did need it in my day-to-day life, I would be able to easily access it, right? But this next video is going to talk about how those cognitive shortcuts can end up backfiring sometimes.
Your brain is a pretty amazing machine. It's a network of about 86 billion neurons that, if compared to a computer, researchers predict is capable of more than 1 trillion processes every second. But it makes mistakes. As much as we hate to admit it, we're only human. Cognitive biases are mental shortcuts we make when we're processing information. They're errors in our judgment. Let's take a closer look. For me, building anything is a labor of love, but our labor may just lead to love. The IKEA effect is the tendency to place a disproportionately high value on things you assemble yourself. Think sets of Lego, origami, or, of course, IKEA furniture. In a series of studies where participants assembled those 3 things, they saw their creations as similar in value to the creations of experts, and they mistakenly thought others would share their opinion. Researchers found the effect only occurred when the creations were fully assembled, and didn't have an impact when things were partially assembled or built and then destroyed. Perhaps our love of DIY creations comes from us investing our time in them. But how much time? The planning fallacy is where we underestimate the time it takes to complete a task. Researchers suggest we underestimate our own task completion times, but not the time it would take other people. One study asked participants to estimate how long it would take to do certain tasks, like shop for a gift, format a document, or prepare a meal. They found that participants who didn't unpack the tasks down into bite-sized pieces were more biased and greatly underestimated how long tasks would take. So when you break things down, they're easier to digest. Unless, of course, you're still trying to digest how much you spent on that IKEA furniture. Post-purchase rationalization is where you persuade yourself using a rational argument that a purchase was good value, like spending $480 on the Apollo loveseat with 2 footstools. Most of us refuse to accept that we could have made a mistake, so we convince ourselves that we've made the right decision. I mean, it even comes with 2 footstools. And the availability cascade is a self-reinforcing process of collective belief formation. So if you repeat something for long enough, something that most other people are saying, it will become true. If you hear that IKEA is a great cultural institution, and you read that IKEA is a great cultural institution, you will probably come to believe that IKEA is a great cultural institution. It's the idea that we follow the crowd based on what's socially acceptable. I mean, IKEA is a great cultural institution. That loveseat even comes with 2 footstools. Sometimes we don't realize that these cognitive biases have affected our behavior. Errors in our judgment often happen subconsciously. I, for one, have committed so many planning fallacies that I still haven't done most of the things I said I would do, or replied to your emails. Sorry. Let me know down in the comments or on Twitter.
And so, like, obviously not to bash IKEA, it's a great place to get cheap furniture when you get your first apartment, right? But then there comes a point where you realize, I gotta throw out this coffee table because it didn't last that long, right? And that can be an eye-opening experience when you get to that point. Spoken from experience, fully admitting. So here are some examples of those types of cognitive shortcuts. So the availability heuristic is you estimate the probability of events based on basically salient data, your personal experience, information that might not be representative. So plane crashes, right? Plane crashes are covered heavily in the news typically, right? So people often believe that plane crashes are one of the most common ways to die. In fact, you're much more likely to die in a car crash, simply because people are driving cars much more than they're flying on planes, right? And cars, for that reason, are more likely to crash. Now, both of those things are still fairly low probability, right? But people tend to think like, I'm gonna die in a plane crash when they sit on a plane and it takes off. They don't think of that every time they start a car, right? So an anecdote to this is to ask yourself, is it typical or is it an anomaly, right? So yes, we hear a lot about plane crashes when they happen, but think how many planes fly every day, right? And even car crashes are the same. The representativeness heuristic is the tendency to judge the probability of things as a function of how well they match our mental representation of a category. So someone mentioned a nurse, oh, that must be a woman, because that's what a nurse is, right? Or an astronaut, a lot of people think of a white guy, right? Because that's who it was back in the moonwalking era. There's a really cute little video, I should have put in this PowerPoint, where they have kids draw an astronaut and then they have a female astronaut visit their class. And like all the kids drew the astronaut as male until they met a female astronaut. And then some of them drew it as female, some drew it as male. So the antidote is to make sure that you have adequate samples, that we are emphasizing representativeness, right? And I think that people are really trying to do this more. There's also something called the framing effect, and this can influence how you make your medical decisions. So it's the influence on a decision maker or problem solver based on the mode of presentation of an issue. So let's say your doctor says this surgical procedure has a 90% success rate. Sounds pretty good. Most people will be like, all right, sign me up. If they need it, right? That's not your surgery, we don't need it. Okay. But if the doctor tells you the exact same information, just in a different way, there's a 10% failure rate, we fixate on that. This happens to professors, particularly new professors, when they first start teaching. We could get 100 excellent comments on our teaching evals, but if we get one bad one, we're gonna fixate on that. Be like, I'm a horrible professor, how am I ever gonna get over this, right? It's just a part of human nature that can be difficult, right? Now I see them as a way to like better my teaching, right? But it didn't always feel that bad. So the antidote here is vigilance in trying to understand the framing, but also acknowledging manipulation, right? And things like marketing, advertising. Is it really too good to be true, right? And political ads are a really good example of this. Some of them crack me up because you all have probably figured out by now I'm fairly liberal, right? And there will be these ads like this person is a liberal, and they make it sound like you're gonna eat your children. And I just sort of laugh, like that's not turning me on for a bit, right? Like maybe for your target audience it is, but if you're trying to go beyond that, perhaps have different framing. We also need to think about ways of believing and valuing. Psychology is a science, just like biology is a science, you know, physics is a science. And we tend to think of science as like above the fray, and there's never any politics or personal opinion in it. And we know that's just not true, unfortunately. There are politics to what gets funded then gets published, and the work that doesn't get funded doesn't get published, right? And we also know that people's personal biases will influence the questions they're asking and therefore the research that's being conducted. And so we need to think about value as both a noun and a verb. So the noun is that objects that we value are valuables, right? I think for a lot of us, it's this thing, right? Like when I can't find this thing, I feel like my arm is cut off, right? My phone is 100% beyond my family. The next thing I would say to the phone, right? But value is also a verb. That means it's a process. It's relating means and consequences, valuing things, appraising things, and psychology as a science, just like any other science, needs to think about what do we value, what is important to us, what is valuable to us, and also what is not valuable to us, right? The APA, when they put out their apology to people of color, they were saying what is no longer valuable to us is research centered in eugenics and racism. That shouldn't be like a profound statement to make, but unfortunately it had to be because of the giant history of that. So this is like the difference between science literacy and scientific literacy, right? So it's not just about the things we value, but the process of valuing things. So the antidote here is if we take seriously the notion that valuing is a process, it's a verb. We'll use the tools that allow us to determine the merit of scientific findings and beliefs. These are things like hypothesis testing, falsification, and searching and acknowledging contrary data. We should not only know what evidence or data support our theory or our view, but also what data we expect if our theory is false. Have the claims we're asked to believe been tested? Have their proponents looked for contradictory data that might show their claims to be false? So the skepticism, right, is embodied in the heart and soul of every researcher. It's why you'll hear us say things like it failed to disprove it instead of it proved it, because we know that next study could always call into question. And that we have verified conclusions from speculation. So it helps us decide what to believe and what to value. And so a lot of my belief system and how I think about things is based on science, yes, and based on data, but it's also based on a healthy skepticism of existing data where we look for inherent biases, right? Particularly data about people, right? Who was included in the sample, who was excluded from the sample. It wasn't until the 1990s that studies were required to include people of both genders. And so a lot of medical stuff wasn't tested on women, right? And you see things like that for any sort of intersectionality. We know that a lot of people we know are smart. Maybe you could think of your roommates, your parents, other members of your family, friends, but then they might do really stupid things sometimes. It happens to the best of us. Maybe people in this room have done that. Never, right? Never. You never do stupid things. Of course, we all do, right? And so this is a little video illustrating that.
According to author David Robson, We're not always as smart as we think we are. Psychological research.
Hang on just a sec. I'm gonna try and get that to a volume where we can understand her more. Yeah.
Suggests that greater intelligence, education, and expertise might actually amplify our errors.
Consider this question. How many animals of each species did Moses take on the ark? The answer, of course, is 0. It was Noah, not Moses, who was supposed to have built the ark. But many intelligent people get this wrong. They are cognitive misers. They are capable of intelligent reasoning, but they don't apply that brainpower effectively, instead relying too much on their gut feelings.
Cognitive miserliness can cause us to be swayed by irrelevant information and our own feelings. For example, leading us to poor financial decisions when buying a house. It can also explain why apparently intelligent people can fall for fake news if they rely too much on the gist rather than the details of a statement.
Sometimes, thanks to the emotional pull of an argument, we think in a very one-sided manner. So Arthur Conan Doyle is the perfect example of motivated reasoning. Now, he was obviously an incredibly intelligent man. He was a doctor and also wrote all of the Sherlock Holmes books, where he really shows a very clear understanding of what logical deduction should be. But in his own private life, Arthur Conan Doyle was not nearly so rational. He had a very strong emotional belief in spiritualism and often visited fraudulent mediums. Now, Arthur Conan Doyle's friends, which included Harry Houdini, the illusionist, often tried to persuade him that he was wrong and to show him the evidence that he was being scammed by these people. But Arthur Conan Doyle just didn't believe their arguments. So, for instance, he would try to bring in the latest physics on the electromagnetic field to explain how fairies might exist but just appeared in another wavelength.
You may not believe in fairies, but motivated reasoning can lead to polarised political views. It may also allow you to rationalise poor business ventures or a failing love affair. You may hope that education or professional expertise would protect you from error, but these can also backfire. After years of experience in a job, experts, for instance, might begin to act on autopilot, and that automatic decision-making can sometimes miss vital information.
This may explain...
This happens no matter where you are. Faculty here sort of joke that here at BWU, there's a way that it's like the Wesleyan way. We do it this way. This is the Wesleyan way. And like, that doesn't always mean it's the best way to do something, right? And so we try to push back on that.
A terrible case from 2004 when a man called Brandon Mayfield was accused of conducting the Madrid bombings. Now, Brandon Mayfield had not left the USA during that time, and yet the FBI's fingerprint examiners still accused him of the crime. The Spanish police had found a fingerprint on a plastic bag near the scene of the crime. Now, the FBI had put that into their computers and they had found about 20 candidates who might have made the match. And when they looked at Brandon Mayfield's, they were sure that they were identical. Yet when you look at the fingerprints, there are actually some very important differences that they had completely missed. But thanks to the curse of expertise, they were susceptible to confirmation bias, so they only saw the bits that matched and were completely blind to the bits that didn't match.
And that problem is why we are designing software and apps to do a lot of this for us, because they don't have that bias. They have, they don't care what this info is. And so like the FBI, for example, now can use a digital process to try to match fingerprints.
sometimes smart people can act stupidly thanks to the people who are around us. A sense of conflict and competition within a group can actually reduce each team member's problem-solving skills and creativity. Even just one or two arrogant team members can completely ruin the group dynamic and reduce the performance of the whole team. One study found that people's individual IQ levels actually drop when they feel in competition with others.
Just think of Iceland's victory in the 2016 Euro Championships. Now, Iceland is a tiny country compared to the rest of Europe. It really doesn't have a huge pool of talent, and yet they performed extraordinarily well. And in fact, they humiliated the England football team by defeating them despite all of our really top-tier players. Now, this is an example of the too much talent effect, because England, with so many star players, really struggled to have a cohesive group dynamic. There were too many egos vying for attention.
Luckily, there are things that you can do to avoid these thinking traps. For example, you can try arguing against yourself. Consider your initial gut reaction and then deliberately try to think from the opposite point of view. Another technique you can use is called self-distancing. Step out of your shoes for a second and think about your issue from an outside perspective. Or you might try mental time travel. Imagine yourself in a month or a year's time looking back at your decision. Lastly, why not try fine-tuning your emotional awareness? Being able to label our feelings helps us to control them. Various studies have shown that this simple technique has actually reduced emotional responses and made people less biased.
So yeah, just really simple things like that can help. All right, so on Friday, we will finish the last few slides for this lecture, and then I will pass out exam 3.